The transport ship moved slowly through space toward the massive training station. Inside the ship, Sora Kim pressed her face against the small window and watched as the giant structure grew larger and larger. The station was bigger than any city she had ever seen back on Earth. It spun slowly around itself, creating artificial gravity for the thousands of beings living inside. "Look at that thing," whispered Jiho Park from the seat next to her. His eyes were wide with wonder and fear. "How are we supposed to fit in with all those alien soldiers?" Sora turned to look at her teammate. Jiho was 22 years old, just like her. He came from Busan and had joined the Earth Defense Force right after finishing university. His hands shook slightly as he stared out the window. "We will figure it out," Sora said quietly. "We always do." Behind them, Tae-Min Lee was checking his equipment for the 10th time. Everything had to be perfect. The military had chosen only 12 humans for this program. They represented all of Earth in this first exchange with the Galactic Coalition. No pressure at all. Squad leader Yan Wu Choi stood up and walked to the front of the passenger area. He was older than the rest of them at 35. He had served in 3 different conflicts on Earth before being selected for this mission. His face was serious as he looked at his small team. "Listen up," Yan Wu said. "In 10 minutes we dock with the station. Remember your training. We are not here to prove we are the strongest or the fastest. We are here to prove that humans deserve a place among the coalition forces." The ship shuddered slightly as it connected with the docking bay. Through the speakers, a voice spoke in perfect English, though it sounded strange and mechanical. "Human transport vessel, you are cleared for passenger disembarkation. Please proceed to processing Base 7 for integration protocols." The door opened with a soft hiss. Cool air rushed into the ship, carrying smells that Sora had never experienced before. Some were pleasant like flowers. Others made her nose wrinkle in confusion. They walked down a long ramp into the station. The first thing Sora noticed was how huge everything was. The ceiling stretched up so high she could barely see it. The corridors were wide enough for 10 people to walk side by side easily. The second thing she noticed were the other beings. A group of creatures that looked like walking lizards stood near an information display. They were at least 3 meters tall with thick dark green scales covering their bodies. Sharp claws extended from their fingers, and their eyes glowed yellow in the artificial light. One of them turned to look at the humans and made a sound like a growling dog. "Krillians," Yanwu said under his breath. The file said they were big, but seeing them in person is different. Further down the corridor, a group of beings that looked like they were made of living crystal moved together in perfect formation. Light passed through their bodies, creating rainbow patterns on the walls around them. These were the Vorthak, Sora remembered from her briefings. Near the ceiling, gas-like creatures floated in special environmental suits. The Nexari could change from solid to gas form at will, according to the reports. Their suits glowed softly with blue light. All of these beings stopped what they were doing to stare at the humans. Sora felt very small suddenly. Back on Earth, she was average height for a woman. Here, she felt like a child among adults. "They are all looking at us," Jiho whispered nervously. "Let them look," Sora replied. "We belong here just as much as they do." A mechanical voice echoed through the corridor. "All new arrivals report to central processing immediately. All new arrivals report to central processing immediately." The humans followed signs written in dozens of different languages and symbols. Finally, they found one written in English that pointed toward central processing. The corridor led to a massive circular room with a raised platform in the center. Hundreds of alien beings filled the room. Sora had never seen so many different forms of life in one place. Some walked on 2 legs like humans. Others moved on 4 or 6 legs. A few floated in the air or crawled along the walls. The platform in the center began to glow. A figure materialized on top of it through some kind of teleportation technology. Sora heard Jiho gasp beside her. The being was enormous even by the standards of this place. It stood nearly 4 meters tall and was covered in thick, black armor-like plates. Its arms were as thick as tree trunks, and its hands ended in claws that looked like they could cut through steel. 2 small yellow eyes glowed from within a helmet-like head. "I am General Vextar of the Krillian Empire," the being announced. Its voice was deep and rumbling like distant thunder. "I oversee all combat training at this facility. For the next 6 months, you will learn to fight alongside beings from 12 different worlds. Some of you will succeed. Many of you will fail." The general's eyes swept across the crowd of new arrivals. When his gaze fell on the small group of humans, Sora saw something that made her stomach tighten. It was not curiosity or welcome. It was dismissal. The general looked at them the way someone might look at insects that had crawled into their house. Each species brings unique strengths to the coalition forces, General Vextar continued. The Krillians provide unmatched physical power and endurance. The Vorthak control energy fields that can destroy starships. The Nexari can infiltrate any position by changing their physical form. He paused and looked directly at the humans again. And then we have the humans. The newest members of our coalition, the species that claims they deserve to fight alongside warriors who have conquered star systems. Several alien beings made sounds that might have been laughter. The Krillians growled with amusement. Even some of the crystal-like Vorthak seemed to pulse with what looked like humor. Sora felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she kept her expression calm. Beside her, she could feel Jiho tensing up. Taemin's jaw was clenched tight. Only Yeonwoo seemed unaffected by the general's words. Training begins tomorrow at 0600 Standard Time, the general announced. You will be divided into mixed species squads. Sleeping assignments and meal schedules are now available at your personal terminals. Dismissed. The crowd began to break up as beings headed toward their assigned areas. The humans stood together, unsure of where to go or what to do next. A small robot approached them. It was about waist-high and moved on wheels instead of legs. Human delegation, please follow me to your quarters. Your orientation materials are waiting. As they followed the robot through the corridors, Sora noticed that other beings stepped aside to let them pass. But it was not out of respect. It was the way people moved out of the way for children or small animals. She could hear whispered conversations in languages she did not understand. But the tone was clear enough. They were not welcome here. They were an inconvenience. A political gesture that the serious warriors had to tolerate. This is going to be harder than we thought, Taemin said quietly. Sora nodded, but kept walking. Tomorrow would bring their first real test. She just hoped they were ready for it. The alarm sounded at exactly 0600 Standard Time. Sora woke instantly, her military training kicking in before her mind was fully awake. Around her, the other humans were already moving. They had learned long ago that being late was never an option. The sleeping quarters were simple but comfortable. Each person had a small room with a bed, desk, and personal hygiene facilities. The walls were made of some kind of metal that felt warm to the touch. Through the small window, Sora could see stars spinning slowly as the station rotated. Everyone ready? Asked Yeonwoo as he checked his equipment one more time. His voice was steady, but Sora could see the tension in his shoulders. As ready as we can be, replied Taemin. He had dark circles under his eyes. None of them had slept very well on their first night. They made their way to the main training area. The corridors were already filled with alien beings heading to the same place. The Krillians moved in groups, their heavy footsteps making the floor vibrate. The crystalline Vorthak glided silently, their bodies catching and reflecting the overhead lights. The gas-like Nexari floated in their environmental suits, making soft humming sounds as they moved. The main training area was enormous. It was like a combination of a gymnasium, a weapons range, and an obstacle course. The ceiling was so high that clouds could have formed up there. Different sections were marked out for different types of training. Some areas had heavy equipment for strength testing. Others had complex mazes and puzzles. In one corner, there was even what looked like a small battlefield with trenches and barriers. General Vextar stood on a raised platform in the center of it all. His massive form cast a long shadow across the training floor. Today he wore what looked like combat armor, though it was probably just his regular clothes. With Krillians, it was hard to tell the difference. Form ranks by species, the general commanded. His voice echoed off the walls without needing any amplification. Today we assess your basic capabilities. Each group will demonstrate their natural advantages. The different species moved into organized formations. The humans found themselves standing together in a small group that looked tiny compared to the others. Sora counted quickly. There were about 50 Krillians, 30 Vorthak, 20 Nexari, and various other species she did not recognize. Then there were 12 humans. Krillians first, General Vextar announced. The large lizard-like beings moved to a section filled with heavy equipment. Sora watched in amazement as they began their demonstration. One Krillian picked up a steel beam that must have weighed several tons and bent it into a pretzel shape with his bare hands. Another punched through a solid concrete wall like it was made of paper. A third grabbed a piece of equipment that looked like a small vehicle and threw it across the room. The watching crowd made approving sounds. Even Sora had to admit it was impressive. The Krillians were incredibly strong, much stronger than any human could ever be. Vorthak, your turn, the general called. The crystal beings moved to a different area where energy weapons and shields had been set up. What happened next looked like magic to human eyes. The Vorthak began to glow brighter. Energy flowed from their bodies and formed into shapes in the air. One created a barrier of pure energy that stopped a blast from a powerful weapon. Another formed energy into a sword-like shape and cut through a thick metal plate like it was butter. A third gathered energy into a ball and launched it across the room, where it exploded with tremendous force. More approving sounds from the crowd. The Vorthak had abilities that seemed impossible by human understanding of physics. Nexari, demonstrate your capabilities, ordered the general. The floating gas beings moved to an obstacle course filled with walls, barriers, and narrow passages. Then they did something that made Sora blink in surprise. They began to change. Their environmental suits became loose and baggy as the beings inside became less solid. Some became like smoke and flowed through tiny gaps between barriers. Others became completely invisible, only their empty suits showing where they had been. One even seemed to split into multiple smaller versions of himself and went through several different paths at the same time. The crowd was impressed again. The Nexari could go anywhere and be anything. No prison could hold them. No barrier could stop them. Sora was beginning to understand why the other species looked down on humans. Compared to these incredible abilities, what did humans have to offer? Humans, General Vextar called. His voice carried a tone that sounded almost bored. Show us what your species brings to the coalition. The 12 humans walked to the center of the training area. Sora felt hundreds of alien eyes watching them. She could hear quiet conversations in languages she did not understand. But the tone was clear. Everyone was expecting them to fail. What should we do? Whispered Jiho nervously. What we trained for, replied Yanwu. Basic human military exercises. They began with simple calisthenics. Push-ups, sit-ups, jumping jacks. The watching aliens seemed confused. These were such basic exercises compared to the incredible displays they had just seen. Then they moved to the strength testing area. Jiho tried to lift one of the weights that a young Krillian had handled easily. He struggled with it, managing to lift it only a few inches off the ground before setting it back down. His face was red with effort and embarrassment. Taemin attempted to punch through one of the barriers that the Krillians had destroyed. His fist hit the concrete and bounced off, leaving only a small scratch. He shook his hand in pain, trying not to show how much it hurt. Sora tried the energy manipulation test that the Vorthak had mastered. She concentrated as hard as she could, but nothing happened. No energy flowed from her body. No barriers formed. No weapons appeared. The other humans tried different tests with similar results. They were slower than the Nexari, weaker than the Krillians, and had no special abilities like the Vorthak. By every measure that seemed to matter here, they were failures. The watching crowd began to make sounds that were definitely laughter now. Some of the Krillians were pointing at the humans and growling with amusement. Even the normally quiet Vorthak seemed to pulse with what looked like humor. General Vextar shook his massive head. This is what Earth sends us? This is their contribution to the coalition military? But Sora was not paying attention to the laughter or the general's dismissive comments. She was watching the other species more carefully. During their demonstrations, she had noticed something that no one else seemed to see. The mighty Krillians were incredibly strong, but they were also slow and clumsy. When they had to move quickly or change direction, they stumbled and got in each other's way. Their great strength was useless if they could not apply it at the right time and place. The energy-controlling Vorthak were amazing when the conditions were perfect, but she had noticed that their abilities flickered and dimmed when there was interference from other energy sources. The lights in the training area seemed to affect them. They needed perfect conditions to use their powers effectively. The shape-shifting Nexari could go anywhere, but Sora had seen them struggle when they had to maintain solid form for extended periods. Their environmental suits seemed to limit how long they could stay in any one shape. They were incredibly versatile but also limited by their equipment. Each species was incredibly specialized. They excelled in their particular area, but they had obvious weaknesses outside of those areas. Humans might not have any spectacular single ability, but they also did not seem to have any obvious single weakness. Enough, General Vextar announced. We have seen what each species can do. Training assignments will be posted this afternoon. Dismissed. As the crowd began to break up, Sora heard more laughter and dismissive comments. The other species were already writing off the humans as useless. They had seen the demonstration and decided that humans had nothing valuable to contribute, but Sora was thinking about something her old instructor had told her back on Earth. The strongest fighter is not always the one who hits hardest. Sometimes it is the one who can adapt to any situation and find a way to win. She looked at her fellow humans as they walked back to their quarters. Jiho looked defeated. Taemin was still rubbing his sore hand. Even Yanwu seemed discouraged. They had failed the test today. There was no denying that. But Sora was beginning to think that maybe the tests were measuring the wrong things. Maybe being the strongest or the fastest or having special powers was not what really mattered in combat. Maybe what mattered was being smart enough to find the weak spots in your enemy's strengths, and humans had always been very good at that. 3 weeks had passed since the first day of testing. Sora woke each morning with new bruises and sore muscles. The training was harder than anything she had experienced on Earth. But it was not just the physical challenges that made it difficult. It was the constant reminder that she and her fellow humans did not belong here. Every day brought new humiliations. During combat drills, the humans were always placed against opponents who were clearly superior. Jiho had been knocked unconscious twice by Krillian trainees who held back most of their strength. Taemin had been trapped in energy nets by young Vorthak, who were still learning to control their powers. Even Yanwu, with all his experience, struggled against opponents who could change their shape or phase through solid matter. The alien instructors made no effort to hide their opinions. During one training session, Instructor Kellax, a mid-level Krillian officer, had openly stated that humans were taking up space that could be used by real warriors. Several other species had agreed with loud growls and energy pulses, but the worst part was General Vextar himself. The massive Krillian commander seemed to take personal pleasure in making training harder for the humans. He would design scenarios that played to every weakness humans had while highlighting the strengths of other species. During zero-gravity combat training, humans struggled while the gas-like Nixari moved perfectly. In high-energy environments, humans suffered while the crystal Vorthak thrived. In tests of pure physical strength, humans failed while even the youngest Krillian succeeded easily. "I think he wants us to quit," Jiho said quietly as they ate their evening meal. The dining hall was enormous, filled with hundreds of alien beings eating foods that ranged from normal-looking to completely unidentifiable. The humans always sat together at one small table in a corner. "He definitely wants us to quit," agreed Taemin. "The question is whether we give him what he wants." Sora looked around the dining hall. At every other table, groups of aliens sat together talking and laughing. They belonged here. They fit in. The humans were like visitors who had overstayed their welcome. "We cannot quit," said Yanwu firmly. "We represent all of humanity here. If we fail, it will be decades before humans get another chance to join the coalition military." "But what if we are not good enough?" asked Jiho. "What if the general is right and we do not belong here?" Sora had been asking herself the same question. Every day brought new evidence that humans were inferior to the other species in every way that seemed to matter. They were weaker, slower, and had no special abilities. Maybe the general was right. Maybe humans should stick to their own planet and leave the fighting to real warriors. But something kept bothering her about that conclusion. If humans were so useless, why did the coalition invite them to join in the first place? There had to be something that the leadership saw in humans that the general and his instructors were missing. The next morning brought another combat training session. This time, General Vextar announced that he would personally oversee the close-quarters fighting drills. "Today we practice hand-to-hand combat," the general announced to the assembled trainees. "Each species will demonstrate their natural fighting techniques. The strong will show their power. The quick will show their speed. The adaptable will show their flexibility." He paused and looked directly at the small group of humans. "And the weak will show us what happens when inferior beings attempt to fight real warriors." The other trainees made sounds of amusement. Sora felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her face calm and expressionless. The demonstrations began with the Krillians. 2 massive warriors faced each other in the center of the training mat. What followed was like watching 2 tanks fight. They threw punches that would have killed a human instantly. They grappled with enough force to bend steel beams. When one finally won, Both fighters had damage to their armor-like skin, but they shook hands and growled approvingly at each other. The Vorthak demonstration was completely different. Two crystal beings faced each other and began to glow. Instead of physical contact, they fought with pure energy. Beams of light flashed between them. Barriers appeared and disappeared. The fight looked like something from a science fiction movie. It ended when one fighter's energy reserves ran low and he conceded defeat. The Nexari fought by constantly changing shape and density. One moment they were solid, throwing real punches. The next moment they were gas, flowing around their opponent's attacks. It was like watching someone fight their own shadow. The match ended in a draw when both fighters became too exhausted to maintain solid form. Impressive displays from all species, General Vextar announced. Now let us see what the humans can contribute to this demonstration. Sora felt every eye in the training hall focus on her and her teammates. The general was clearly planning to use them as an example of human weakness. She could see it in his yellow eyes and the way his claws extended slightly from his massive hands. You, the general said, pointing directly at Sora. Come forward. I will personally demonstrate the difference between human fighting techniques and real combat skills. The training hall fell completely silent. Even the background hum of the station's system seemed to fade away. Sora stood up slowly and walked to the center of the mat. The general followed her, his massive form casting a shadow that covered her completely. Standing next to General Vextar, Sora looked like a child next to an adult. She barely reached the middle of his chest armor. Her entire body probably weighed less than one of his arms. The difference in size and strength was so obvious that some of the watching trainees made sounds of pity. This is what happens when weaklings attempt warrior training, the general announced to the crowd. His voice carried clearly throughout the hall. Observe the vast difference between a real fighter and a human, pretending to be one. Sora took a fighting stance that she had learned in basic training back on Earth. It was nothing fancy, just a balanced position that would let her move quickly in any direction. The general looked down at her and made a sound that might have been laughter. Are you ready, little human? He asked in a voice that dripped with condescension. Sora nodded once. Then let me show everyone what real combat looks like, the general said. He raised his massive clawed hand high above his head, clearly intending to demonstrate his overwhelming superiority with a single devastating blow. The watching crowd held their breath. This was not going to be a fight. This was going to be an execution, a demonstration of what happened when humans tried to play with real warriors. General Vextar smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. Then he brought his massive hand down toward Sora's head with enough force to crush steel. What happened next would change everything. Time seemed to slow down as General Vextar's massive clawed hand descended toward Sora's head. The watching crowd expected to see the small human crushed instantly. Some of the younger trainees even closed their eyes, not wanting to witness what they thought would be a brutal demonstration of superior power. But Sora did not panic. She did not try to run away or throw up her hands in a desperate block that would accomplish nothing against such overwhelming force. Instead, she did something that surprised everyone in the training hall. She stepped forward. While the general's massive fist was still descending, Sora moved closer to him instead of away. She stepped inside the arc of his attack, moving to where his claws could not reach her. At the same time, she reached up and caught his wrist with both of her hands. To the watching aliens, it looked like suicide. How could such small hands stop such a massive arm? The general himself seemed confused by her actions. He had expected her to try to block or dodge, not to grab onto his attacking limb. But Sora was not trying to stop his attack with strength. She was using something that every human learned in basic self-defense training, but that no alien species had ever needed to develop. She was using leverage. Instead of fighting against the general's downward force, she used it. She stepped to the side and twisted his wrist in a direction that it was not designed to bend. At the same time, she applied pressure to specific points on his arm that she had learned about in human anatomy classes. Even alien joints had limits. Even Krillian bones could only bend in certain directions, and Sora had just found exactly the right angle to turn the general's own strength against him. T's sound echoed through the training hall like a gunshot. Cracked. General Vextar's roar of pain shook the walls. The massive warrior, who had never been defeated in 17 interstellar conflicts, dropped to his knees screaming. His wrist bent at an angle that made several watching trainees look away in shock. The training hall fell completely silent except for the general's cries of agony. Hundreds of alien beings stared in absolute disbelief. The mighty Krillian general, who could crush steel with his bare hands, was on the ground holding his shattered wrist while a human female who weighed less than 60 kilograms stood calmly beside him. Sora released the general's arm and stepped back. Her expression was calm and controlled, as if what had just happened was the most natural thing in the world. In human military doctrine, "General," she said in a clear voice that carried throughout the silent hall, "we call that using superior force against itself. Your strength became your weakness the moment you committed to an uncontrolled attack." The medical team rushed forward to attend to General Vextar. The station's advanced medical scanners quickly confirmed what everyone could already see. The general's wrist was completely shattered. Multiple bones were broken, ligaments were torn. Even with the best Krillian medical technology, it would take months to repair the damage completely. As the medics carefully moved the general onto a stretcher, he looked up at Sora with an expression that was completely different from the condescending smile he had worn moments before. There was pain in his yellow eyes, but there was also something else. Something that might have been respect. How? He managed to ask through gritted teeth. "Physics," Sora replied simply. "Every human child learns that technique matters more than strength. We had to learn it because we evolved on a world where almost everything was bigger and stronger than we were." Word of what had happened spread through the station faster than light-speed communications. Within hours, every being on the facility knew that a human recruit had defeated General Vextar in single combat. The details got more dramatic with each retelling, but the basic facts remained the same. A small human female had broken the wrist of the most feared Krillian general in the Coalition fleet. The reactions were mixed. Some species, particularly the younger trainees, were impressed and curious. They wanted to know more about human fighting techniques and how such small beings could be so effective in combat. But others, especially among the Krillian instructors, were angry and embarrassed. Their greatest general had been humiliated by what they still considered an inferior species. They demanded investigations and claimed that Sora must have used some kind of hidden weapon or technology. The medical examination proved otherwise. Sora had used nothing but her bare hands and knowledge of anatomy and physics that any human soldier would have learned in basic training. That evening, as Sora and her teammates ate their meal in the dining hall, they noticed that the atmosphere had changed completely. Instead of dismissive laughter and pitying looks, they received curious stares and whispered conversations. "I cannot believe you actually did that," said Jiho, shaking his head in amazement. "You broke a Krillian general's wrist." "A general. I used his own strength against him," Sora replied. "It is not that complicated. Any of you could have done the same thing if you had been in the right position." "But we were not in the right position," pointed out Taemin. "You saw something that the rest of us missed. You knew exactly when and how to act." Yanwu nodded approvingly. "That is what good soldiers do. They assess the situation and find the enemy's weakness. Today you proved that humans have something valuable to contribute to the Coalition forces." As they were finishing their meal, a group of Vorthak trainees approached their table. The crystal beings pulsed with different colors as they communicated among themselves. Finally, one of them spoke in heavily accented English. "Human Sora," the Vorthak said, "we wish to learn your fighting technique. Will you teach us how to use enemy strength against them?" Before Sora could answer, a group of young Nexari floated over in their environmental suits. "We also want to learn," one of them said in a voice that sounded like wind through leaves. "Our shape-changing abilities are powerful, but your knowledge of leverage and anatomy could make us much more effective fighters." Soon their table was surrounded by curious aliens asking questions about human combat techniques. For the first time since arriving at the station, Sora felt like she and her teammates were not unwanted visitors. They were teachers with valuable knowledge to share. But the most important reaction came 3 days later when General Vextar was released from the medical center. His wrist was still in a regeneration cast, but he could move around normally otherwise. Instead of being angry or seeking revenge, the general did something that surprised everyone. He requested a private meeting with Sora and her team. When they arrived at his office, the general was studying reports on human military history and combat techniques. His desk was covered with files about human conflicts, training methods, and tactical innovations. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to chairs that had been adjusted to human size. "We need to talk." General Vextar looked different than he had before the incident in the training hall. His massive frame still dominated the office, but there was something changed about his posture and the way he looked at the humans sitting across from him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine curiosity. "I have been studying your species for the past 3 days," the general said, gesturing to the files scattered across his desk. "What I have learned has been very educational." Sora noticed that his injured wrist was still wrapped in a medical device that helped the bones heal properly. Even with advanced alien technology, the damage she had caused would take weeks to repair completely. "I owe you an apology," the general continued. "All of you. I judged your species based on the wrong criteria. I looked at your size and strength and concluded that you were worthless as warriors. I was wrong." Yanwu leaned forward slightly. "What changed your mind, General?" "Pain," Vextar replied with what might have been a smile. "When Recruit Sora broke my wrist, it forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about combat effectiveness." He picked up one of the files and opened it. "I have been reading about human military history. Your species has been fighting wars for thousands of years, not just against each other but against your entire planet. Predators that were faster than you, environmental conditions that should have killed you, diseases that wiped out other species completely." The general stood up and walked to a large display screen on the wall. With a gesture, it showed images from Earth's history. Humans fighting lions with spears, humans crossing frozen wastelands, humans surviving in deserts and jungles and mountains. Every other species in the coalition evolved as apex predators on their homeworlds, Vextar explained. Krillians were the strongest creatures on our planet. Vorthak could manipulate energy better than any other life form on theirs. Nexari could change shape while everything else was locked into one form. More images appeared on the screen. This time they showed the various alien species in their natural environments, all clearly dominant over other life forms. "But humans," the general continued, "humans evolved as prey animals who refused to stay prey. You were weaker than the big cats, so you learned to use tools. You were slower than most predators, so you learned to hunt in groups and use strategy. You had no natural weapons, so you made your own." Sora had never thought about it that way before. On Earth, humans were just humans. But compared to these alien species, they really were like prey animals who had somehow managed to become the dominant species on their planet. "Your fighting techniques reflect this history," Vextar said, turning back to face them. "When Sora grabbed my wrist, she was not trying to overpower me. That would have been impossible. Instead, she found the weak point in my attack and used my own strength to defeat me." The general touched his injured wrist gently. "In all my years of combat, no opponent had ever done that. Krillians fight with strength against strength. The strongest wins. Vorthak fight with energy against energy. The one with more power wins, but humans fight by making strength irrelevant." Jiho spoke up for the first time. "Is that really so unusual? It seems like basic common sense to us." "That is exactly the point," Vextar replied. "What is common sense to humans is revolutionary to every other species in the coalition. We have become specialized to the point where we can only think in terms of our own strengths." The general activated another display. This one showed tactical scenarios from various coalition military operations. "Look at these battle plans. Krillian forces always attack head-on with maximum strength. Vorthak forces focus on energy weapons and barriers. Nexari forces rely on infiltration and stealth." He changed the display to show human military tactics from Earth's history. But human forces adapt their tactics to the situation. Sometimes you attack directly. Sometimes you retreat and strike from ambush. Sometimes you use the enemy's own weapons against them. You do whatever works, not just what your species is naturally good at. Taemin nodded slowly. "We had to learn to be flexible because we were not naturally superior at any one thing." "Exactly," the general agreed. "And that flexibility makes you incredibly dangerous opponents. An enemy can prepare for Krillian strength or Vorthak energy manipulation. But how do you prepare for opponents who will use any tactic that works?" Yanwu was beginning to understand where this conversation was heading. "You want us to teach these concepts to the other species? I want you to revolutionize coalition military doctrine," Vexitar replied. "For too long we have relied on each species doing what they do best. Krillians provide muscle, Vorthak provide energy weapons, Nexari provide reconnaissance. But we have never had a species that specializes in making everyone else better at their jobs." The general brought up a new file on his computer. "I have been in communication with Coalition Command about your species. The initial reports focused on your physical limitations, but after what happened in the training hall, they are very interested in learning more about human tactical thinking. Sora felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was far beyond what she had expected when she joined the exchange program. What exactly are you asking us to do? I want you to help design new training programs that incorporate human tactical concepts, the general explained. Not just for humans, but for all coalition species. Imagine Krillian warriors who know how to use leverage and joint locks. Picture Vorthak energy manipulators who understand misdirection and psychological warfare. Think about Nexari infiltrators who can adapt their techniques based on what they encounter, instead of just following pre-planned missions. The possibilities were staggering. Each alien species was already incredibly capable within their specialties. If they could learn to think more flexibly and adaptively like humans did, they would become exponentially more effective. There is one more thing, the general added. Coalition Command has authorized the expansion of the human exchange program. Instead of 12 humans, they want to bring in 200. They want to establish a permanent human training cadre to work with all coalition forces. Yanwu whistled softly. That is a massive increase. Are you sure the other species will accept human instructors? After what happened in the training hall, word has spread throughout the coalition military, Vextar replied. Every commander wants to know how a 60-kilogram human defeated a veteran Krillian general in hand-to-hand combat. They want their troops to learn these techniques. The general paused and looked directly at Sora. Your action that day did more than just break my wrist. It broke through centuries of prejudice and assumptions about what makes an effective warrior. Sora felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She had just been defending herself and trying to prove that humans belonged here. She had not intended to start a revolution in military thinking. Will you help us? The general asked. Will you help the coalition learn to fight the way humans fight? Sora looked at her teammates. Jiho was nodding eagerly. Taemin looked excited about the challenge. Yanwu had the expression of a soldier who had just been offered the mission of a lifetime. Yes, Sora replied. We will help you. But we have one condition. What is that? We do this as equals, Sora said firmly. Not as junior partners or special advisors. If humans are going to help revolutionize coalition military doctrine, we want to be full members of the team that makes it happen. General Vextar extended his uninjured hand toward her. Agreed. Welcome to the coalition military, Instructor Sora. As she shook the massive Krillian's hand, Sora realized that everything had changed. 3 weeks ago, humans were unwanted guests trying to prove they belonged. Now they were essential partners in reshaping how the galaxy's most powerful military force would fight its wars. But the real test was still to come. Training exercises were one thing. Soon they would face their first real battle, and everyone would see if human tactics really could make a difference when lives were on the line. 6 months had passed since Sora broke General Vextar's wrist. The training station had been transformed from a place where humans were barely tolerated to the center of a military revolution. Human instructors now worked alongside alien trainers, teaching adaptive tactics and flexible thinking to coalition forces. Sora had been promoted to captain and given command of the first mixed species tactical unit. Her team included Krillians who had learned to use leverage instead of just brute strength, Vorthak who combined energy manipulation with misdirection, and Nexari who adapted their infiltration techniques based on real-time intelligence instead of following rigid plans. The changes were remarkable. Krillian warriors who once relied only on overwhelming force now used joint locks and pressure points to defeat opponents without causing unnecessary damage. Vorthak energy specialists learned to create false targets and use psychological warfare to confuse enemies before striking. Nexari scouts developed the ability to change their plans, instantly based on what they discovered during missions, but the real test came when the coalition received an emergency communication from the Outer Rim territories. The hegemony, a militant empire that had been quiet for decades, was launching a massive invasion. Their fleets were advancing toward coalition space with technology and tactics that no one had seen before. Captain, Sora stood in the main briefing room alongside General Vextar and the other senior commanders. The holographic display showed the invasion force. Hundreds of massive ships moving in perfect formation toward 3 different coalition worlds. Initial contact reports are not encouraging, announced Admiral Korthaz. an elderly Vorthak who commanded the Coalition's Third Fleet. The hegemony ships are using some kind of adaptive shielding that adjusts to whatever weapons we use against them. Our standard tactics are proving ineffective. General Vexitar pointed to the tactical display. They seem to have studied our previous battles and developed countermeasures for every conventional strategy we have used. Their ships are configured specifically to defeat Krillian frontal assaults, Vorthak energy weapons, and Nexari infiltration attempts. What about their ground forces? Asked Commander Silin, a Nexari who led special operations. Even worse, Admiral Korthaz replied grimly. They are using some kind of modular combat system. When our forces adapt to their tactics, they simply reconfigure their units and change their approach. It is like fighting an enemy that learns and evolves during the battle. Sora studied the intelligence reports carefully. The hegemony forces did seem to be adapting to coalition tactics very effectively, but there was something familiar about their approach that made her think of her early days at the training station. Admiral, she said, may I ask a question about the hegemony's tactics? Of course, Captain. Are they adapting to our tactics, or are they simply prepared for our standard approaches? Admiral Korthaz looked confused. What do you mean? The hegemony has been observing coalition forces for decades, Sora explained. They have seen how Krillians always attack head-on with maximum force. They know that Vorthak always lead with energy weapons. They expect Nexari to use stealth and infiltration. She gestured to the tactical display. But what if we do not fight the way they expect us to fight? What if we use the new hybrid tactics that we have been developing here at the training station? General Vextar's eyes lit up with understanding. You are suggesting that we use the hegemony's preparations against them? Exactly, Sora replied. They have prepared for the coalition forces they know about. They have not prepared for coalition forces that fight like humans. The senior commanders looked skeptical. Commander Silin spoke first. Captain, with all due respect, this is our first major conflict since the integration program began. Are you certain that untested tactics are wise to use against such a serious threat? They are not untested, Yanwu said from his position near the back of the room. He had been promoted to major and now served as the head of human tactical integration. We have been running simulations and exercises for months. The hybrid tactics consistently outperform traditional approaches. Admiral Korthaz looked at the intelligence reports again. What exactly are you proposing, Captain? Sora moved to the tactical display and began highlighting different areas. Instead of meeting their fleets in direct combat, we use hit-and-run tactics. Small mixed-species units that can adapt their approach based on what they encounter. She pointed to one of the hegemony formations. Their ships are configured to withstand massive frontal assaults. But what happens if we attack from multiple directions simultaneously? Krillian ships provide the distraction while Vorthak vessels strike from unexpected angles. Meanwhile, Nexari infiltrators disable their adaptive systems from the inside. But that would require perfect coordination between all three species, objected General Vextar. Our forces have never operated in such integrated formations before. That is why we have been training mixed-species units, Sora replied. My tactical group has been practicing exactly these kinds of coordinated operations. We know it can work. Admiral Korthaz was quiet for a long moment, studying the proposed battle plans. Finally, he spoke. The conventional approach is clearly not working, and the hegemony advance will reach coalition worlds in less than a week. He looked around the room at the other commanders. I am authorizing Captain Sora to lead a demonstration mission. If her hybrid tactics prove effective against a single hegemony squadron, we will consider implementing them on a larger scale. 2 days later, Sora found herself aboard the coalition vessel Harmony's Edge, leading a strike force unlike anything in the galaxy's military history. Her ship carried Krillian warriors trained in human tactical flexibility, Vorthak energy specialists who understood misdirection, and Nexari scouts who could adapt their plans in real time. The target was a hegemony advance squadron, 5 heavy cruisers escorting a massive command ship. According to intelligence, this was the force that had defeated 3 different coalition fleets using conventional tactics. All units report ready, announced Jiho from the communications station. He had been promoted to lieutenant and now served as Sora's tactical coordinator. Remember the plan, Sora said over the ship's communication system. We do not try to overpower them. We do not try to out-technology them. We make them fight our fight instead of their fight. The Hegemony Squadron was moving through space in perfect formation, their adaptive shields glowing with energy that would deflect any conventional weapon. Their command ship was protected in the center, surrounded by smaller vessels in a defensive pattern that had proven unbreakable against traditional attacks. Begin Phase 1, Sora ordered. 3 Krillian assault ships appeared at the edge of sensor range and began a direct frontal approach, exactly what the Hegemony expected from coalition forces. The enemy ships immediately reconfigured their shields and weapons to counter the anticipated heavy assault. But as the Hegemony focused their attention on the approaching Krillian vessels, Vorthak ships appeared from completely different directions. Instead of using their energy weapons directly, they created false sensor readings that made it appear as if the real attack was coming from 12 different locations. Simultaneously, the Hegemony command ship found itself trying to defend against threats that did not exist while ignoring the real dangers that were approaching from angles they had not prepared for. Phase 2, Sora announced. While the enemy was confused by the false targets, Nexari infiltrators who had been hiding in empty space began to phase through the hulls of the Hegemony ships. But instead of following their traditional approach of gathering intelligence, they immediately began sabotaging the adaptive shield systems from the inside. Their shields are fluctuating, reported Taemin from the sensor station. The adaptive systems are trying to compensate for internal damage and external threats simultaneously. Phase 3, Sora said with a smile. Now came the part that no enemy could prepare for. All coalition forces suddenly changed their tactics completely. The Krillian ships that had been approaching for a frontal assault split up and began attacking individual targets with precision strikes instead of overwhelming force. The Vorthak vessels stopped creating false targets and began using their energy weapons in ways that exploited the gaps created by the sabotaged shield systems. The Nexari infiltrators adapted their missions based on what they found inside the enemy ships, creating maximum chaos instead of just gathering information. The Hegemony Squadron, which had been configured to fight 3 different types of predictable enemies, suddenly found itself facing opponents who were using elements of all 3 approaches simultaneously while also doing things that no coalition force had ever done before. The battle was over in less than 20 minutes. All 5 escort ships were disabled. The command ship, unable to adapt its systems fast enough to counter constantly changing tactics, surrendered rather than face destruction. Mission successful, Sora announced to the fleet. The Hegemony Squadron has been neutralized with minimal coalition casualties. The news spread through coalition space faster than the ships could travel. A small mixed-species force led by a human captain had achieved what entire fleets using traditional tactics. 5 years had passed since the end of the Hegemony War. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. When 12 nervous humans first stepped off their transport at the Coalition Training Station, Colonel, Sora Kim stood on the observation deck of the new Coalition Tactical Integration Academy, watching mixed-species training units practice the hybrid combat techniques that had become standard throughout the galaxy. Below her, Krillian cadets worked alongside Vorthak energy specialists and Nexari infiltrators, learning not just their own species' strengths, but how to adapt and combine different approaches. Based on the situation, the academy had grown, from a single training station to a network of facilities throughout coalition space. What had started as an experiment with 12 humans had become a revolution in military thinking that affected every aspect of galactic civilization. Hard to believe it all started with a broken wrist, said a familiar deep voice behind her. Sora turned to see General Vextar approaching. The massive Krillian moved more slowly now, his age beginning to show despite his species' natural longevity, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made him one of the Coalition's most respected commanders. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you had not challenged me that day, Sora replied. Would humans have found their place in the Coalition eventually, or would we have remained outsiders forever? You would have found a way, Vextar said confidently. That is what humans do. You find ways to succeed where others see only failure. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the training exercises below. A group of young Krillians was practicing joint locks and pressure point techniques under the instruction of Major Taemin Lee. Nearby, Vorthak cadets worked with Lieutenant Colonel Jiho Park to learn how psychological misdirection could make their energy weapons far more effective. The new class of recruits arrived this morning, Vextar mentioned. 200 beings from 17 different species, including 50 humans from Earth's expanded military exchange program. Sora nodded. The numbers had grown dramatically over the years. What had once been a token gesture of inclusion had become an essential part of coalition military development. Every major operation now included human tactical advisors, and mixed species units led by human-trained officers had become the standard throughout the fleet. Any word from the frontier surveys? She asked. Actually, yes, Vextar replied, his expression becoming more serious. Long-range scouts have detected signs of another unknown civilization beyond the Rim territories. Early reports suggest they may be even more advanced than the hegemony was. Sora was not surprised. The galaxy was vast, and the Coalition had only explored a small portion of it. There would always be new challenges, new enemies, new problems that required solutions no one had thought of before. Are you worried? She asked. Vextar made the Krillian sound that passed for laughter. 5 years ago, I would have been terrified. An unknown enemy with superior technology was the worst possible scenario for conventional military thinking. He gestured toward the training areas below, where beings from a dozen different worlds worked together as seamlessly as if they had evolved side by side. But now I am almost curious to see what happens when an enemy that has prepared for traditional galactic civilizations encounters coalition forces that fight like humans. Sora understood what he meant. The old coalition military had been predictable because each species always fought the same way. Krillians used strength, Vorthak used energy, Nexari used stealth. An intelligent enemy could prepare for those approaches. But the new coalition forces were different. They combined elements from all species while incorporating the human philosophy of adapting tactics to fit the situation rather than forcing situations to fit predetermined tactics. No enemy could prepare for opponents who might use any combination of approaches and change their strategy multiple times during a single engagement. Speaking of fighting like humans, Vextar continued, I have news about your next assignment. Sora raised an eyebrow. I thought I was staying here at the Academy for another 2 years. Coalition Command has other plans, the General replied. They want you to lead the new Deep Space Exploration Initiative. Mixed species crews using human tactical principles to explore unknown regions and make first contact with whatever civilizations we encounter. The assignment was both exciting and daunting. First contact situations were among the most delicate and dangerous missions in galactic diplomacy. They required not just military skill but also cultural sensitivity and the ability to adapt to completely unknown situations. When do I leave? Sora asked. In 3 months. That gives you time to select your crew and complete the advanced diplomatic training program. As they continued to watch the training exercises, Sora reflected on how much her life had changed. She had joined the military exchange program hoping to prove that humans deserved respect as soldiers. She had never imagined that she would end up helping to reshape how an entire galactic civilization approached warfare and exploration. General, she said quietly, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever regret what happened that day in the training hall? Having your authority challenged so publicly? Vextar was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of serious consideration. That day I learned something that changed my entire understanding of strength and leadership, he said. For most of my life I believed that being strong meant never showing weakness. I thought that good leaders dominated through superior power. He held up his left hand, the one that Sora had broken years ago. It had healed completely, but he still wore a simple metal band around the wrist as a reminder. You taught me that real strength sometimes means acknowledging when you are wrong. Real leadership means learning from those you underestimate, and real power comes from bringing out the best in others, not from proving your own superiority. Sora felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the station's environmental systems. The respect in the General's voice was something she had earned through years of hard work and dedication, but it still meant a great deal to hear it acknowledged. Besides, Vextar added with what might have been a smile, that broken wrist led to the most successful military revolution in galactic history. I would say the temporary pain was worth the permanent improvement in coalition capabilities. A soft chime sounded through the observation deck, indicating that the afternoon training session was ending. Below them, The mixed species units began filing out of the practice areas, talking and laughing together in a dozen different languages. "Look at them," Sora said, watching a group of young Krillians walking alongside Vorthak and Nexari classmates. 5 years ago, those species barely tolerated each other. Now they fight as one unified force. And it all started because one small human refused to be intimidated. Vexstar replied, "You changed the galaxy, Sora. Never forget that." As they prepared to leave the observation deck, Sora took one last look at the training facility that had become her second home. In a few months, she would be heading into unknown space with a hand-picked crew of the galaxy's best explorers and diplomats. They would encounter new civilizations, face unknown dangers, and hopefully expand the Coalition's understanding of what was possible in the vast universe. But no matter how far she traveled, or what new challenges she faced, Sora knew she would always carry with her the lessons she had learned in that training hall 5 years ago. Size and strength were not what made someone powerful. The real power came from refusing to accept limitations, finding creative solutions to impossible problems, and never giving up even when everyone else expected you to fail. As she walked through the corridors of the academy, Sora passed classrooms where the next generation of Coalition officers were learning to think beyond the boundaries of their species' traditional approaches. They were learning to be flexible, adaptive, and creative in their problem-solving. They were learning to fight like humans. And somewhere in the vast galaxy beyond the Coalition's borders, unknown civilizations continued their own development, unaware that they might soon encounter explorers who combined the best qualities of dozens of different species with the uniquely human refusal to accept that any problem was truly impossible to solve. The galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place. But that, as they say, is another story.